how much attention should be paid to the LOI when putting that together and submitting it to a seller?
My rule of thumb is usually everyone has an LOI template that works with me, and that's just because they usually have come from somewhere where somebody has given them a template for an LOI. It'll take me 5 to 10 minutes to review your LOI.
The difference between paying a real estate attorney 3, 4, 5, 6 grand versus paying a real estate attorney 15, 20, 25 grand. What is the difference?
Do you want a cheap attorney? I mean, think about the fact that if you're going to a criminal court for something, would you go out there and go, who's the cheapest attorney I can find to keep me out of jail? Never. So why is real estate any different? And so I think that the difference between the flat fee or the smaller fee real estate attorneys is probably.
Stephanie Cooper, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We're super excited to have you. Just for the folks here, let's give a little bit of a background. I know you've been doing this longer than I have, by the way. You've been an attorney longer than I have, and I've got all the gray hair, but is it 27 years? Is that how long, Steph?
28 this year.
Wow.
Yeah.
So super experienced, but tell us a little bit about, what you do, how you got here, and then I'm going to dive into my number one pet peeve right off the bat. So Stephanie, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I actually started out in the finance world. I started out as counsel for banks, counsel for Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and the FDIC. Handled a lot of stuff from them, all the way from default and compliance over to a lot of their legal issues and litigation. And I've done a lot of federal court litigation on behalf of some of the national associations. So that was kind of how I cut my teeth. And that sort of brought me into the recession period of life, as I love to call it, back in 2007, 2008, that we all went through, that are around my age bracket, which was a definitely different period of time, because we went from nice 110% loans on houses where everybody got a house for free, got some money in their pocket, to how are we going to manage to hold this all together? And we saw it from the bottom up with what I was working on, because we were dealing with a lot of homeowners. But then I also saw it from the business side, because I was in business. I was a partner in a law firm that was in Nevada, Arizona, California, and Utah. And we had national contracts with most of the banks. And we handled a lot of the sorting out and restructure of a lot of businesses and commercial transactions. So if there was a fireman to be had back in the recession period, that's kind of where we were stuck. And from that point forward, I started, once the economy got better, started going back into the real side of things, where we're buying and moving and grooving and structuring and building and buying. And so that's how Mauricio and I had managed to hook up along the way, because with all the syndicated entities and all of the real estate deals that kind of merged themselves together, he and I are kind of a very likely pair. So he handles all the nuts and bolts, and I handle all the dirt. And it sort of works out pretty good.
No, that's not true. Everybody thinks I'm a real estate attorney because, well, probably primarily because I'm affiliated a lot with the real estate guys, but I am not a real estate attorney. I don't even play one on TV. So I'm super excited to have you here, Stephanie. And again, if you're joining us late, this is for you guys to drop questions. I'm going to start right off the bat with my number one pet peeve. And I think people have heard me today, but I want to go through this because I think this is really, really, really important. And that is the difference between paying a real estate attorney 3, 4, 5, 6 grand versus paying a real estate attorney 15, 20, 25 grand. Because I've seen clients who are used to literally spending $3,500 for their real estate transactional help, or maybe having it packaged. And then I've got other clients that are paying 25 grand. And the mistake I think many people make is that they think it's the same. It's like, I'm just getting a cheaper version of whatever. But so walk us through, Stephanie, what exactly would you be doing for a syndication client that somebody who's coming in for 3 or 4 grand or 5 grand even would not be doing? So let's start there. What is the difference?
I don't know if anybody in here ever listens to Jeff Foxworthy or not, but he used to have this skit about driving down the freeway and seeing this giant billboard that said cheap laser eye surgery. And he's like, who ever thought I wanted laser eye surgery that was cheap? One eye's good, one eye's worse. I walk out of there, I can't see. He's like, yeah, and it's true. And it's the same way with attorneys. I mean, do you want a cheap attorney? I mean, think about the fact that if you're going to a criminal court for something, would you go out there and go, who's the cheapest attorney I can find to keep me out of jail? Never. So why is real estate any different? And so I think that the difference between sort of the flat fee or the smaller fee real estate attorneys is probably a little bit in service and a lot in experience of knowing what else to ask. I mean, there's a lot of states that have fill in the blank contracts for real estate now. Just and people come to me all the time and they're like, here, can you revise my purchase and sale agreement? My realtor did it. And I say, okay, and I'll look at it. And then I'm like, well, we have to add a 3-page addendum. But yeah, I mean, we can work with it if that's what you want to work with. I mean, there are times whenever you're dealing with mom and pops on the other side of things, whenever you got a transaction you're trying to get, and sometimes those are the best deals, right? So I have attorneys who will say, or clients who will say to me, can you put it on the front and the back of one page? I'm always like, now that's going to be a trick, but I'm going to figure it out if that's what you need me to do, because I don't want to scare off Joe. And Joe is a, old school boy that just wants to see one piece of paper. But primarily, I kind of consider myself sort of a concierge attorney. If you're coming to me, I'm giving you my cell number. If you're coming to me, you're saying I may be doing a business deal whenever. That might happen at a bar at 9:00 on Thursday. And you're going to text me and say, hey, I have to have this letter of intent over to this guy by 10:00 in the morning. And I'm picking up your text. And so not only am I picking it up, but we're scheduling a call for 8:00 in the morning for a Zoom call to sit down and say, all right, I mean, I need more information than you found this building for $5 million. I need to know what you're going to use it for. I need to know what your plan is. Are you going to syndicate? Are you going to do a joint venture? How are you going to bring the money in? Oh, it's okay. You're getting your money from these other 2 guys. That guy's got 1031 money. Okay, let's talk about that for a second. How are we going to get that in? Because it's not flat. It's not just something that I can say, there's bubble gum on the counter, it's 25 cents. With these kind of deals, it's a lot more intricate. And if you're dealing with people that don't have experience, or you're dealing with somebody who's just looking at a contract and going, yep, the boxes are checked, they're not ever asking the questions that will get you to what you need in that contract. Good example of that. One of the things that we had on one of the transactions was an assignment of service contracts when somebody bought a development. And that's kind of normal. You see it a lot. People will go, okay, yeah, we'll take over your service contracts. Well, in this particular state, this company had agreed to put in all new toilets, like low flush toilets, shower heads, sinks, whatever, at no upfront cost. But they had a service contract that would blow your mind how much it was. And it would also blow your budget and your underwriting. And so if you would have just signed that and just said, yep, we'll take all the service contracts, and if we don't tell you within 3 days which ones we're going to accept, we've accepted them all. If they would not have had that clause in there, they would have ended up with $35,000 a month in money that they would not have had. And so it's knowing to ask those questions and knowing to kind of look at the projects. I think that is the difference between the checkbox $4,000 attorney who maybe turns around your purchase and sale agreement in 3 weeks, maybe, and hopefully they're back in town whenever you need a revision. And somebody who gives you their cell number and says, yep, hit me up. I mean, Mauricio's team I work with all the time, they're fantastic over there. And they are so good at setting up the Zoom meetings. And I learned from them. I give you out a link now that says, you want to book on my calendar? You can look at it. There's a free spot, take it. And that's the difference, I think, Mauricio.
Yeah, no, and the other thing you just brought up, which is so true, and even applies when people send me over contracts. People forget first of all, the purchase and sale agreement is a contract, but really a contract is what the 2 parties have agreed on. It's like the memorialization of that agreement. And so without knowing what the agreement is or not asking the questions, like people can grab a templated contract out of the internet, but then it's the experience of knowing what questions to ask, what things to think through. I mean, I've seen contracts that don't even have extensions. Like literally I've had, or have only 1 extension when they really should have 2 or 3 extensions. And that's caused them to lose money. But I guess the pet peeve for me really comes into play because you're literally saving 5, 10, maybe 15 grand. So that's your reward. You saved 10, 15,000, but your risk is in the millions because it's all that money that you've raised. And if you miss something in the contract, if you didn't get that additional extension, you missed, I know you work through, you pull the title report, you see there's a bunch of easements and there might be some prohibitions on the property, things you can and cannot do. The risk reward ratio to me is just so out of whack. You're risking millions, if not tens of millions of dollars, and your reward is 5 or 10 grand. And some people don't even use an attorney, which is even crazier. Charles says, my cheap CPA missed a 100K tax credit. How expensive was that? I mean, it turns out to be way more expensive on the back end. You mentioned LOIs, Stephanie. Can we talk a little bit about LOIs? How important are they? First of all, are they binding? Are they not binding? But how important are they? How much attention should be paid to the LOI when putting that together and submitting it to a seller?
I have a little bit different theory on LOIs than I know that they teach in some of the classes and seminars that are out there. I always say I like to detooth the dragon. If there's something that's really important to me that I think is a make or break for me, I put it in that LOI. So, I mean, every seller wants to see in there that you've got non-refundable money and your money's hard, right? We all know that's paragraph 3, money's hard after whatever, and that's fine. But if there's something that's a do or die for me, like if there's a financing contingency, if there's an appraisal contingency, if there's a way for me to get back out of that contract if something doesn't work out, I want to make sure I kind of hint at it, at least in the LOI, because once it gets to their attorney and we start going back and forth with the attorneys, and the attorney goes, "There's no financing contingency in your LOI. That's not the offer they accepted." Versus if I at least have something in there that says, that there is a valuation, a condition on value. I can word it like that. Subtle. But at least that way, whenever their attorney comes back and goes, "It's not in there," I go, no, no, no. We said there was a condition on the value of the property. It had to appraise. Condition on value. That's what that meant.
Is that something you help your clients with, Stephanie? Do you work on the LOI with them, or do you just sort of, how do you work with your clients with LOIs? Do you draft them? Do you review them? How does that work?
My rule of thumb is usually everyone has an LOI template that works with me, and that's just because they usually have come from somewhere where somebody has given them a template for an LOI. Now, I do have a template LOI that I give out if anybody needs it. But basically my rule is if people start working with me, it'll take me 5 to 10 minutes to review your LOI. That's it. So you set 5 or 10 minutes on my calendar. That's as long as you have. We look at it. I ask you the questions. We make sure there's nothing wrong with it. I don't charge you for it. Go out there and get the deal. You get the deal, you sign the deal, then you come back, we'll do the PSA. But LOIs, we turn in 5 to 10 minutes because it's really not anything other than just basic, what are you afraid of on this deal? That's usually my question. What are you afraid of? Don't tell me how much you're willing to pay and how much money you've got for earnest money deposit and whether or not your friend James is coming into town and is willing to give you 90 grand. I don't need to know about any of that. I need to know what your worries are so that we can get them in the LOI, because if you get the deal, I want to make sure it's going to stick. So
That's awesome. 5 or 10 minutes. We should start. I've thought about this before. We sometimes do sort of a pre-engagement package for our clients. I mean, we should throw in that 5 or 10 or 15-minute call with you to just kind of review
countdown timer, 5 minutes.
5 minutes, especially if it's your template, right?
That's right. Exactly.
Back in the day, meaning 6 to 12 months ago, LOI shopping was a big thing. Is that still going on these days? Is it recommended to try and get in a contract ASAP, or is that, now that the market's changed, it's not as big a deal as it used to be?
It's interesting that you asked that. It is not like it used to be. It certainly is not the seller's market that it once was, where they're, waiting with 14,000 bids. I think that there's a lot of distressed properties right now. I think that there's a lot of people that even if they're not distressed yet, they're coming up on it. So many people bought and got bridge loans and got terms that are getting ready to expire. So many people got themselves in interest rate caps that are getting ready to expire. There's lots of refinance stuff going on right now. There's lots of people wanting their money out because the economy is a little weird. So there's lots of investors that have started to kind of kick a little bit here and there, and that's making people nervous and putting people on the market. So I would say there's less LOI shopping now. However, to your point about how quickly we need to get under contract, I still think that purchase and sale contract, the longer it lingers, the worse it's going to go. I mean, and I think we see it all the time, whether, I will turn red lines on something 24 to 48 hours. I'll send it back over to the other side. And then a week and a half from now, I haven't heard from anyone. And I'm like, what's going on? Is somebody on vacation? Is somebody sick? Is something, and then I find out that there's negotiations going on behind the scenes because somebody got some numbers and they don't like them and the brokers are talking and da 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 da. And the longer that lingers, the more it seems like they fall out.
You mentioned that, all these, bridge debts expiring, rate caps expiring. Do you help clients navigate through that? If you've got a client who's got their debt's coming due, or their bridge debt's coming up on that 3 years, their rate caps expiring, do you counsel clients on that? Or is that something that you refer to sort of a loan modification expert? What's your role in that whole process?
We've been doing a lot of pre-term counseling with people. We've got a lot of situations where we've got GPs who get into situations where they've now got management control, obviously, but they need some money, they need some cash flow for whatever reason, whether that's because they do have to refinance, whether their ratios are off for refinancing. So they're trying to figure out, how do we bring in more capital? And, to the extent that we have to go through the operating agreement and kind of determine, do we do a capital call? How do we do that capital call? What's the messaging going to look like on that capital call? And if we don't really want to do a capital call, but we want to bring in more money from the GPs, how do we do that? How do we write that up? How do we get paid back? What are the terms? We do a lot of that right now. I would say our acquisition practice is down probably 40%, and our workout stuff is up substantially. So any of those kind of things are kind of where we're at right now, and the refinances and the market and dealing with this is where the experience part comes into. There's some lenders that are not doing so hot right now, and they're not doing so hot translates to you're not doing so hot if you've got to try and refinance with them, because they are absolutely not moving on things. And so to answer your question, that we deal with every piece of it, so it really just depends.
Are lenders willing to modify? Have you seen any sort of, back in 08, I remember loan modifications, like granted it was single family, but loan modifications were a big deal back in 07, 08, well, 08, 09, I guess.
No.
Are banks working? What are banks doing? Is it a yay or nay? You either have to be able to qualify for a new loan, or you're out.
They'll milk you for extension money while they drag you along, waiting to try and figure out what you're going to do next.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I see that's the biggest problem is people get in that first extension and they breathe a sigh of relief, and then there's still not a real solid plan on. And a part of this is just the economy. It's very unstable right now, and the interest rates are fluctuating, and so everybody's waiting for the next drop so that they can take advantage of it, and that's fine and reasonable. But the lenders are not being gracious right now at all, and there's no oversight in this world. In the homeowners, we dealt with so much coming down from the federal government on homeowners on single family back in the recession. And that's just not something, there's not really a consumer protection bureau for investors.
That's true. Yeah. DJ has a question which was kind of related to one of mine, so I'll ask DJ's question. He asks, what are the top 5 things to include in a contract, in a PSA, and 5 things to look out for, and 5 risks? Man, he threw in a back-to-back there, a back-to-back. 5 things to look into, 5 things to include, and 5 risks when you're creating your PSA.
Like a double Jeopardy question.
Yeah, I know, right?
That's tough. 5. How about 3? No.
Let's do a couple. That's a lot.
Let's just do a couple
what are the top what are the top 2 or 3 things that should be in a contract that a lot of people overlook or don't think through it too much?
A way out is probably my number one thing. A way out. Yeah. And a lot of that, we do kind of like, as I have a master's degree in English, which has nothing to do with anything other than the fact I'm pretty good with wording things in such a way that we can kind of get through some stuff in contracts, which is good. I mean, it came out to something other than just, what my mother told me it would never make anything of. But So, making something a condition precedent to closing, something that doesn't, we're still saying our earnest money deposit is non-refundable, but a condition to us closing is that we have to have X, Y, or Z. So a way out's probably the number one thing I would say. The number two thing I would say is, what obligations are you taking on of the sellers that you may or may not be able to realistically do smoothly? And I say that because we get a lot of things where we had a retail shopping center close last week. And in that shopping center, there were several tenants. A couple of them were still in the tenant improvements area. Some of the leasing commissions were still out there. Um, we didn't approve any of the plans. We don't know who did approve the plans. And the seller wanted to put those funds into an escrow where basically the title company would decide whether or not to pay out that money. That's not realistic. That's something that you have to look for ahead of time. On properties, if you're buying multifamily properties, just as an example, the first thing I'm generally going to ask you about the property is, what year is it? What vintage is it? Because I'm trying to figure out, are we going to find bad plumbing? Are we going to find a bad electrical box? Are we going to find something that's going to kill this deal because there's no way you can bring in enough money to fix that? Or are we going to find that so late in the game that the lender is not going to lend until it's fixed and we don't have the runway to get it done? And so figuring out what obligations we're putting on ourselves that are not realistic is probably the second part of the PSA that I worry about. It's not the clauses in the PSA that say you got 30 days of due diligence and 15 days to look at title and 10 days to do objections. Every real estate attorney that's worth their salt can do those things. They write out a timeline, they check off the boxes. It's not that hard. But what happens whenever something's outside of those boxes? That's where the problems are.
What about extensions? What are you recommending? One extension, two extensions, 100 extensions, or as many as you can get? What does that look like generally?
I normally do 2 extensions of 15 days if I can get them. I figure that's an extra month, gets us to the next, it's crazy, but sometimes tax prorations alone, that extra month will save you, if you have to have it to just bend it back. So 30 days is typically what I'm gonna look for, and then beyond that, we hope to goodness that if we have to have them, that somebody's gonna work with us. But usually you can't get past that.
Do,
So.
do, do you ever see issues with these are kind of more technical things that I always think through too. Do you ever have any issues with the seller getting into contract when it's not really the seller, meaning they get into their personal name when maybe the seller's a trust or an LLC? Is that a way for sort of sellers to get out of things, or is that not something you really are too concerned about?
I think sometimes sellers have cheap laser eye surgery attorneys too. So, sometimes they go in the wrong names, and sometimes then you have to get an assignment and try and work with that. But most of the time, sellers are not scrounging around for the next big deal, at least not right now, not in this market. I think that, seller default was a problem, say a year and a half ago, because they'd get a better deal and they didn't care whether or not they sold to you or not. There was no sense of propriety about stuff like that. So the first time that you skipped a step, they were in there to call default and sell it to the next guy. Right now, we're not in that spot that I see.
Good, good.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Bobby was on, by the way, if you guys have questions, please keep dropping them. They're coming in. Bobby asks, what is a quantitative and or qualitative methodology for evaluating an attorney? I presume you mean a real estate transactional attorney, but what are some of the things they should be looking at when they're trying to hire? Hopefully they're not charging you $3,500. That would be my first sort of red flag.
Um, I think the expediency within which someone responds to you is a huge, to me, a huge flag. You know, yeah, as much nobody wants to be with the toxic person that texts, 2 seconds after you text, right? But as an attorney, yeah, you kind of want that from your attorney, because sometimes you don't have 5 hours to wait. Sometimes you don't have 2 weeks to wait until they get back and feel like calling you, and that's the biggest complaint that I get, actually. Whenever people come to me that usually the reason that they come to me is because they say, I've heard that you're responsive. And I always think that's so weird because, I mean, it's my job. I mean, like, I don't understand why that's such a deterrent for a lot of attorneys, but, um, so yeah, I think the qualitative test would be that.
Yeah.
Qualitative test is how fast is this person responding to me? And not on top of that, are they responding with questions and things that are getting me to the next level with what I'm trying to do? Or are they telling me just to send them all the stuff and they'll get back with me later? Because if that's what they're doing and you don't have any input, I don't know what's on the inside of your deals. Most of the time, I'm assuming that you guys have been somewhat engaged in a transaction for a good couple weeks before you've ever even said boo to me. So I'm assuming if you're in the area, you've driven around it. If you're not in the area, I'm assuming that you've talked to a couple different brokers or, you've had your feelers out there. And I kind of want to know that stuff because that's kind of what's going to create our plan on what we're going to do. And so, I mean, sometimes we had one property I remember, and I looked at it and I said, this looks like it's close to the university because I had looked it up on the map. They said, oh yeah, we want to do student housing with this multifamily that we're dealing with. So, oh, that's great. And so then I kind of pulled up the reviews of that apartment complex and it had like a 2. And I'm like, oof, what's going on with that? They're like, oh, there's some safety issues in that neighborhood. I'm like, oh, so insurance. Insurance is going to be a problem. Have you checked on insurance rates? You know, and so I almost kind of feel like I sort of partner with my people to some extent, kind of throwing out, it's not just this contract at paragraph 3 sub C should say that, it's the buyer cost, not the seller cost. I do that. But I think it's more than that. I
Yeah, and I think
tend to
that I was gonna
tend
say
to
I
have
think
more relationship with my clients with business stuff.
yeah, and I think that's why we get along so well and why we tend to refer a lot of people over to you is because we're the same way. The two biggest mistakes, the two biggest complaints, I should say, that I hear from people coming from other firms are access to lawyers. This turnaround speed of getting back to people, it frustrates the crap out of me because I have to chase attorneys, and by the way, CPAs are the same way. And you like send them an email, you call them, and it takes like 3, 4, 5 days, or sometimes a week, and you have to follow up. And so having that response time, which is what we really focus on, is just huge. And then of course, turnaround speed is the other complaint we get, which is why we turn everything around in about a week. But
Mhm.
that's one of the reasons we're so aligned in that, because we do believe that getting back to the client immediately, or within at least a reasonable time. I like to get back the same day, but even if it's 24 hours, a lot of attorneys, that's you think that would be taken for granted, but it's not, which is amazing.
No,
Um,
apparently not.
uh, Percy asked about deposits going hard. Are you seeing hard deposits going down recently, or is that still an issue?
Well, I mean, sellers still want it, obviously. I'm seeing a lot of sellers who want some money to take it off the market. It's not like it used to be where they were wanting 3% down, and after 30 days, you were locked out of it. It's more like if I'm going to pull this off the market for 30 days, I want to at least know that I've got $10,000 in my pocket. So I haven't just lost the month, right? So seeing a little bit more of pay to play than I am greed right now. Because they know that once you guys get in there that you're gonna do your underwriting and, you're gonna figure out what you wanna do with it, and you may or may not stay in. So they'll give you a 30-day period of time to look around and do whatever, but they want something up front of some sort. It doesn't
Yeah,
have to be huge, just more than what they had whenever they went into the contract usually. So,
let's talk about some of my not my some of your biggest mistakes. It's always one of my favorite questions. Biggest mistakes that you're seeing, especially syndicators make on the transactional side. Anything that kind of pops out?
ugh, that's a sore spot.
Uh-oh. Why? Now I'm really pumped about it. Why is it a sore spot?
Oh, the backfill. The
Talk about that.
infamous backfill.
All right, talk about the backfill.
Oh, well, there's 2. There's the lack of sponsor agreement and the backfill. These are my 2 least favorite things. So you found somebody, they said they'll take part of the GP, they want on their schedule of real estate owned. So they're willing to come in and they're willing to put your earnest money deposit down. Fantastic, right? No sponsor agreement in place. And then somebody says, well, Joe was supposed to go down there and look at the property, and he didn't go down there because his wife was sick and she was in the hospital. And so now we're a month behind, and we haven't got the estimates yet. And I'm sorry, but we might fall out of contract and you might lose your money. And there's no agreement in place with that sponsor. And that sponsor's looking at you going, where's my money? And you're going, well, I mean, you had that money at risk. That's why we were giving you the GP share. That was the point. And they go, but you just didn't do what you're supposed to do. So how is that my fault? Why do I lose my money?
Yeah.
And now we have litigation, or we have a litigation attorney. And guess what? People who have enough money to give you earnest money typically have lawyers. So having a sponsor agreement up front, pet peeve, get it in writing. I know it scares people a little bit because you have to be real blunt and honest that their money is at risk, but it will save you stress at the end. So that is one of my pet peeves. The other one is this backfilling thing. We're going to push money together from my uncles and my aunts, and we're going to make this thing close. And then we're going to backfill into all of these spots. And this is where I go, that is Bethany and Mauricio's lane, how you get these people in after the deal closes, because I'm here to get the deal closed. Deal's closed. Yay, we closed. Everybody had champagne. It was a good night. Now you got to try and figure out the rest of it. And so then I get a flood of people wanting assignments of membership interests where they're trying to backfill for those spots. I don't know what disclosures have been made. And it feels like chaos. So that's my biggest pet peeve.
Yeah, we luckily it's happened so many times. I think we've got a specific disclosure in there that might be something that happens, that there's some kind of a placeholder that's going to be there. But I think one of the reasons that sponsors are hesitant to do those sponsor agreements is because there's there's a little bit of shenanigans going on there and people getting compensated to raise capital, and so putting it all in writing gives them less flexibility if they just didn't have it in writing, and then you could go back and claim, whatever. I think that's one of the things. And then the other issue that pops up, for just so you know, Stephanie, on the backfilling too, is people tend to get excited and start posting all over social media that they've closed on the deal and congratulations and champagne's popped, not realizing that they're still raising, that the offering is still open because had to backfill. So they still have to raise another 50, 100, 150 grand. And yet they're all on social media because they think the deal's closed, but it's not, it's still open. So that could also blow exemptions. So no, I love those pet peeves. Guys, if you have questions, drop them in the chat. I've got a few more here because I've been, well, actually I should ask you, Stephanie, anything that you're seeing today that's different, that you're sort of counseling your clients that they should be aware of, that maybe wasn't an issue a few years ago?
I would just say that, there's a lot of properties. I have this thing whenever I get a group together that I tend to think that there's cheerleaders in the group, usually on syndication deals. There's the ones that have got super enthusiasm, who are 100% go, 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 go. And that's usually who reaches out to me at first, probably who also reaches out to you, Mauricio, and originally. And then I always look to find who my minder is, as I call it. Who's the person who, after the acquisition closes, is the one that's keeping an eye on this? Who's the one who's actually managing the asset manager? Who's the one who's handling the day-to-day? Who's going to stay on this deal while everybody else is trotted off to greener pastures onto the next deal for the next acquisition fee? Who's handling this? And that has changed a lot, because I don't know what everybody else's view of the world is. People are a little less likely to work full-time at things these days for some reason. It's hard to get people to show up even at McDonald's, right? So, if you're not watching what people are doing, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. If you're not managing it, it doesn't get managed, because people just are not doing their jobs like they used to. And in my opinion, at least. And so if nobody's watching what's going on, and if nobody is actually getting the capital expenditures done, if nobody is following up and getting the invoices and getting them to the lender for reimbursement, and following up with the lender to get the reimbursement and putting that money back in the account, and keeping that flow of things going on a current asset, there's a problem. And I am seeing so many of those right now, where it seems like in the last couple of years, we've had so many cheerleaders and so few minders. And so, and I love the minders because they're kind of nerdy like me usually. They like the numbers and they like keeping their eye on things and those kind of things. But um that's the one thing I have seen change. There has to be a lot more management day to day on things than there used to be.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think Paula was asking? Why are these GPs not doing their jobs?
Mm. Um, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, it depends on the composition and, you know, people I'm sure come to you and ask you this question too. Whenever they're trying to get groups of people together that they think would be good for them to work with, whenever they're trying to create their GP team, and they'll come to me sometimes and they'll be like, you know, what do you think about? I'm like, who's doing this? Who's doing this? Who's doing this? Who has a track record of doing this and staying on task? Who's who's handling that? And if it wasn't put together in the beginning, it's not going to just suddenly somebody's going to come out of it and go, I already got my acquisition fee 2 years ago, but you know what I love to do? Have a full-time job managing a property management company that I am in another state from.
Yep. And DJ was asking me about your contact. I'm going to drop your website in there as we keep going. Now you do litigation as well.
Ooh, I love
Which
litigation.
I know, which is where I started my career too. I started as a litigator, as a defense attorney. In what capacity would you work with syndicators? I mean, if syndicators start getting demand letters from their unhappy LPs, is that something you would help them with?
You know, I try not to get in between people in the syndication and in the syndication arena for obvious reasons, because it's very hard to keep off conflicts. Because if you're a GP here, you're probably an LP somewhere else, and I don't know. I don't know if I helped you or it didn't help you inside of an LLC. But no, the litigation that I am very fond of is property management companies right now. I really don't like them very much for the most part. I've had a lot of problems with them in the last couple of years, just doing their jobs and keeping up with things. And so the litigation part of me, I think, is a strategic advantage in terms of I don't play very well. Once we have a contract and we have something going, if we got something we need to take care of, we take care of it. And so, you know, my kids growing up used to laugh saying, you know, my mom writes mean letters to people. And I said, yeah, I get to say the things to people that other people wish they could say, but don't. So that gets to be my job. And so no, getting things straightened out, staying on top of people and having the litigation sense to be confident enough about that to put your point out there and to make it stick. I mean, so I don't always handle the litigation because I'm obviously not licensed in every state. And
Right.
litigation is a huge time suck as an attorney. You know, as an attorney, if I'm in court, I'm not making any money for the most part. I mean, because it's just draining time away from me that I could be using to draft or talk to people or whatever. Um, but we do manage litigation in other states for litigation attorneys. If we've got people that have disputes, if you're in the syndication market, I mean, you're going to have problems. You're going to have problems with contractors. You're going to have things that don't get done right. You're going to have collections issues on some things. You're going to change property management companies. You're going to change whatever you're going to do, where there's going to be issues that you may need litigated. And at least I feel confident in the fact that I'm going to push you in the right direction, at least toward whether you should litigate, whether you should try and work it out, whether it's something we can mediate, arbitrate, or whether or not we need to get counsel for you in whatever state we're talking about. So
Yeah, and I can tell you as a former litigator as well. I mean, one of the first things that demand letter is probably the first thing that you want to do. So that's where you want to reach out to somebody like Stephanie or just to write that nice little letter, right? Just letting them what the issue is. And Paula was asking a question about like, audits. Do you handle any of the SEC audits if something like that happens, or that doesn't sound? I didn't think you were.
not my lane,
Yeah, not me, Elaine.
not my lane.
And just so you guys know, so we typically, I like to do this myself because I've had such a good, not to pat myself on the back, but I've had a pretty good track record on this. But like whenever we get a notice from a regulator or the SEC, it's usually the states, we tend to respond first because usually our response nips it in the bud, especially the way we do it. But even us, if that now goes to the next level and they say, well, thank you for the letter and thank you for the documents. I want more. I want to depose your client, or I want to do something else. Then we're gonna offload it to somebody who's a specialist in that area. But no, 100%. One last question I had, and then I'll see if there's any more questions here. But is the reports, right? You're always pulling, you pull an environmental report, you pull title reports, you pull a bunch of these reports. I know for a fact the quote unquote cheap attorneys aren't even looking through those. Tell us a little bit about what you look for in those environmental and title reports. I mean, we talked about easements a little bit earlier. What are you looking for? What red flags are you searching for in those reports?
The biggest place that I tend to find things, and remember, I do commercial development stuff all the way across, not just multifamily
Yeah.
but is CCNRs and restrictive covenants and those kind of things are where I find there to be the biggest lack of attention and the biggest levels of concern. And it's strange some of the things that you find. I mean, I go back to the shopping center that I closed last week, but there was a prohibition in there against leasing out to any chiropractors, physical therapy places, and some other type of thing. This is somebody that you wouldn't think of as objectionable. I mean, we're not talking about a vape shop. We're talking about care, right? Medical care. And the reasoning is because the people who actually originally bought and created that shopping center were chiropractors, physical therapists, whatever, and they had their offices there 20 years ago. Well, I mean, is that a big deal? Is it not a big deal? I don't know. But I mean, as rental space goes up and there's less tenants that are going to take over space, those are people who have to have physical space. So you've just taken those people out of the market. You can't rent to them. So I think that some of those kind of things that we find whenever we do title reviews and title objections tend to be more helpful than others. You don't ever want to get down to the line with a lender and then have them come in and say you've got some sort of non-conforming zoning, whatever they say. I mean, we've had that happen on a couple of properties where they're like, you don't have enough parking spaces. And we're like, well, how'd the last guy get the loan? Yeah, there must have been a different lender. Oh, okay, great. So, everything from that type of stuff to going, and we go into the municipalities, we'll look and see whether there's code violations reported in municipalities or not. Or we'll tell you where to look if you'd rather look yourself, if you want to go down there and grab a copy, to see what kind of problems there have been. Maybe they're not open anymore, but maybe they've had a consistent problem in 2 buildings over. We had one that we closed on. It was a series of buildings. One building had a code violation on it because the electrical was running off the corner of the building to the pole. Everything has to go underground now. And we found one that was a closed violation. And it was that closed violation that led me to say, have you walked this property? Have you looked at the other buildings? And sure as heck, there's 2 more buildings. Well, what does it cost to dig and put a wire under the ground? It ain't cheap. And so sometimes whenever we find those reports, it's more valuable just knowing where to look and where to dig and seeing what else is out there. Because there wasn't a code violation on it. There was no open code violation. The seller didn't have any kind of disclosure requirement. There was nothing going on with it right now.
It's all like a hidden treasure. It's all in those reports. Stephanie, I told you I'd get you out here in 45 minutes. We're coming up against that thing. I put your law firm and phone number in the chat, but do you have a specific place you want people to go find you? Any social media handles or emails, or is the website the best place to find you?
The website's the best. My email is the best place to find me, but I'd also like to put my HubSpot probably in the chat.
Yeah,
If
please
anybody
do.
wants to schedule with me, that's
Please.
usually how I schedule.
Please drop it in
And
there.
yeah, that's the easiest way, because then that way you can just get on my calendar if you want to get on there. My only rule is this, if it is an introduction meeting, it's probably going to be no more than 15 minutes. We decide whether or not we need to do anything, what we need to do. I don't give out legal advice in that meeting. But if you want to go further, or if you have, particular plans, then at that point we would create more of a formal relationship, and go forward from there. So
Perfect. And I'm definitely going to talk to Bethany and figure out a way how we get that little 10, 15 minute or 5 minute LOI
count
review call, because I think I think that's something that could be super helpful for clients even before they are, get a contract accepted or ready to raise capital. So Stephanie Cooper, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for adding so much value to the real estate syndicator community. Really, really appreciate you. And I'm sure I'll talk to you super soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Stephanie. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.
If you'd like to join us live on these episodes and have a chance to get your specific question answered, you can simply go to realestatesyndicatorlive.com and register to be live on the show. Hope to see you then.